Continue the cycle again. Malak ora ora Tiferito with me. In Act 1, Scene 1 of Much Ado About Nothing, I counted the 16 nouns which begin with the letter A or E. Then I looped the scene around to show just where in the 338 lines of Scene 1 they occur. The maroon-colored slices are the frequency of the A nouns and the lime-colored slices are the E. 1 H. 2 Army. 3 I. 4 Allegiance. 5 Allegiance. 6 Allegiance. 7 Answer. 8 Anger. 9 Argument. 10 Atom. 11 Earthquake. 12 Embassage. 13 Action. 14 I. 15 End. 16 Encounter. Malak Donna with me. I don't know why I have not asked this before, I guess it just never came up. Where is there any love in the Iliad? It has to be in the reunion of Chryses with his daughter Chryses in Book 1. I was thinking about this after being absorbed in my Much Ado About Nothing writings because Hero and Claudio are reunited on their second marriage day. Earlier in the action, Claudio, who can be said to be a sort of satanic figure, Satan's name means the accuser in the book of Job in the Tanakh, or Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament. Claudio is accusative of Hero, and she supposedly dies by his slander. He thought he could trust the things he heard, like Othello thought he could trust his sight, needing ocular proof which turned out to be a trick, just as in Claudio's case. Things get better when their love is rekindled at the end of the play, but for Othello it was too late, his objective proof set up by Iago failed him. Anyways, love in the Iliad is a rare find. Malak Lisbeth with me. Scenes and acts, inner circle, the pathways. 1 Red before Leonato's house. 2 Yellow a room in Leonato's house. 3 Lima hall in Leonato's house. 4 White Leonato's orchard. 5 Brown Leonato's garden. 6 Dark green a street. 7 Blue purple Hero's apartment. 8 Purple another room in Leonato's house. 9 Hot pink a church. 10 Pink a prison. Malak Lisbeth with me. I just finished reading Sitrae Torah, The Secrets of the Torah, which is a book by Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia from 1280 CE Spain. I had one other of his books a while back, before I left for and came back from Hawaii, called The Divorce of the Names. Sitrae Torah is a mystical interpretation of Moses Maomed's Guide for the Perplexed, and one of the beginning sayings which struck me, quoted from Proverbs 3:5 is, "Trust the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight." This is not a saying which contradicts Emerson's self-reliant "Trust thyself," because there was a part of Emerson which he himself trusted, his God within. I think the line from Proverbs may be a little harsh, but if you use Emerson again to balance it, Emerson might say that we cannot learn anything from anybody, but we can be provoked. Perhaps, Emerson also was speaking of himself too, who as a self took much advice from his God within, his own higher authority. Malak Donna with me. The percentage, per act, of the names of the characters being spoken in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing in relation to the other characters' names being spoken in each act. Blue, Benedict. Brown, Hero. Purple, Claudio. Red, Margaret. Black, Don Pedro. White, Antonio. Gray, Don John. Orange-red, Ursula. Green, Beatrice. Yellow-green, Conrad. Orange, Borachio. Yellow, Friar Francis. Pink, Leonardo. Malak Bertha with me. Hamlet killed more people than King Claudius, but apparently Hamlet sent Claudius to hell, in Hamlet's thinking, by killing him at the play's end because Claudius killed Hamlet's father. Yet, if Hamlet were to have killed the king while the king was praying, Claudius would have gone to heaven, in Hamlet's thinking. The time when Claudius was praying was before anybody other than Hamlet's father was murdered. Malak Thrickbut with me. The names in the names. 1 Benedict has ice in his name because just like 2 Beatrice, he is cold to women, she to men. 3. Claudio has Claude in his name because he surely can get married a second time, though to the same woman. 4. Hero has her in her name, who is the lady of Claudio's love, because he loves her. 5. Leonardo has not in his name because he will not let Dogberry tell Dogberry's important news because he does not have patience with him. 6. Borachio has Boar in his name because he is just that, a boar. 7. Don Pedro has Drop in his name because he is dropped by Beatrice when he makes a playful advance upon her. 8. Ursula has As in her name because she asks Benedict to write her a sonnet, a poem which sometimes uses similes as. 9. Don John has On in his name because he is honorary. 10. Margaret has Game in her name, being that she plays with Borachio on her balcony. 11. Conrad has Con in his name because he is just so. 12. Antonio also has Not in his name because he is not happy with Claudio when he slanders Hero. 13. Friar Francis has the word casa in his name because he makes everyone feel at home. Malak Diana with me. Transports, portals, pairs/matches of portals. Beatrice's name is spoken 11 times in Act 1, and Hero's name is spoken 11 times in Act 5. Hero's name is spoken 16 times in Act 4, and Claudio's name is spoken 16 times in Act 5. Claudio's name is divided in 1/2 from the 16 instances to get 8 times. Stepping backwards to Act 4, and Margaret's name is spoken 8 times in Act 5. Margaret's name is spoken 7 times in Act 3, and Leonardo's own, 7 times. In Act 5. Leonardo's name is spoken 5 times in Act 4, and Don Pedro's is said 5 times in Act 1. Don Pedro's name is said once in Act 2, and Benedict's is said once in Act 4. Benedict's name is said 12 times in Act 3, and Claudio's 12 times in Act 1, whereas Claudio's name is said 14 times in Act 2, and Benedict's 14 times in Act 1. Benedict's name is uttered 23 times in Act 2, which is the total of Beatrice's name spoken in Act 2 and Act 5. Beatrice in Act 4 has her name said 8 times, and Margaret's is spoken 8 times in Act 5. And also, twice that number, 16 times is Hero's name spoken in Act 4. Hero's name is pronounced 9 times in Act 3, while that number 9 is the total of the number of times, being 3, that Don John's name is uttered. In Acts 2, 3 and 5. Don John's name is spoken 5 times in Act 4, and Ursula's name is spoken 5 times in Act 3. Ursula's name is said once in Act 5, and Antonio's is said once in Act 2. Antonio's name is said twice in Act 5, and Borachio's twice in Act 2. Borachio's name is spoken once in Act 1, and Leonardo's once in Act 3. I could go on to show how the connections between pairs of names, which were spoken in Much Ado About Nothing, all form once interweaving path, but it would take a while, and they do. Of these 13 characters whose names are pronounced in the play, only Claudio and Hero, who have the most times their names are spoken, 56, also are matched in this transport by this number, 56. They are the lovers who didn't get married the first time, but did get married the second time. Malak Elaine with me. In Habereshit, the first book of the Bible, as I interpret it, one thing I noticed is that God asks Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. Notice that he said this to them under banishment from the paradise of the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. I know as a poet who writes poems to read better that, first I multiply these poems, and second it is not exactly done while in heaven. It can be hard work. Multiplication is hard work. I feel a little jealous of some who do not multiply anything. They must be in heaven by this conceptual analysis. Then I think of how Plato banished the poets from the perfect society of his utopian republic, or would if he only could, but still I am not going to stop writing poems as long as I see a need to improve my own literacy. At times it seems unfair, but that is how the Bible is sometimes at times. But not, I believe, as a whole. Malak Teresa with me. I am not saying we should go out now and transgress certain mitzvah. but technically all of the laws of and in the Bible were issued post-Edenic. I believe that the function of reading is not so much to separate knowledge from ignorance, or if it is the sort of separation which makes a distinction, I am learning, between good and bad. In general I believe that the imagination is educative, and therefore without reading, or learning in a broad sense, how will we know how to interpret what is good from bad? Over time things can mature with experience, but we waste time when we chose what we know is bad over what we already understand as good. Malak Amy with me. When I think of God being praised, I always think that praise should be to Him for the people in our lives, and not a praise of the universe. We do not know all of the universe, but we can think of our imaginations as gifts greater even than the atoms which make up the universe. For the imagination and people and other companions in our lives are the best creations which I think merit God's praise. I can imagine us existing without an universe, but not without companionship. Malak Thrickbut with me. 290 names of the characters are spoken by the characters over the range of the entire play, Much Ado About Nothing. Benedict had the most instances with 55, Hero 56, Claudio 56, Beatrice 42, Leonardo 27, Margaret 18, Don John 14, Don Pedro and Ursula with each 6, Borachio 4, Antonio 3 and Friar Francis 2. This number 290 is Shakespeare's most of all his plays for characters pronouncing each other's names. While I am just beginning to look for patterns and secrets in the play, I want to point out that there also are many times characters are either in disguise or mistaken for others in the play. Margaret pretends to be Hero. Hero is disguised near the end. Antonio tells Ursula he's not Antonio when masked. Claudio when masked says he is Benedict. And Dogberry asks the villains Conrad and Borachio to confess in writing and name themselves. Malak Bertha with me. In perspective, if every character in Much Ado About Nothing between Hero's first and last appearances took a week each to say their lines in their own exchanges, then the play, from Hero's start in Act 1, Scene 1, to her close in Act 5, Scene 4, the play would take 18 years to get from Hero's start to her end, with each new exchange between characters taking a week long to utter. Malak Donna with me. There are about 1,000 total exchanges of speeches between the characters during this play. The first word, letter, and last word, letter, in the play MAAN, of every character. Messenger, first word, he, H, to last Messina A. Don Pedro, first word, good, G, and last, man N. Leonardo I, and afterward, D. Don John I, and up, P. Claudio, Benedict, B, and the, E. Benedict, were W and Piper's S. Antonio he H and her R. Balthazar, well W and Lord D. Borachio I and her R. Conrad what W and S. Dogberry RA and neighbor R. Verges Y and 2O. Friar Francis UY and presently Y. Hero my M and Benedict K. Beatrice II and Consumption N. Margaret, so S and Legs S. Ursula, II and presently Y. Sexton, Senior S and Examination N. First watch, Hugh H and Lock K. Second watch, both B and all L. Dash. 2 items I am noticing, the first word of Claudio's is heroes, they are lovers, last, that word is the name of their friend Benedict. Also, both Friar Francis and Ursula have their last word in the play as the same, that word is presently. Malak Ora with me. I would like to imagine a scene with Don Pedro and Claudio once speaking between Hero coming first and Don John last. The total would be 4 characters H, E, R, O. Malak Honey with me. There are 6 separate paths of characters speaking in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing between instances of Hero and Don John speaking. I chose Hero because she had the shortest single name in the play, and Don John because he had the shortest double name in the play. Let hero be H and Don John be O. In hero's own name there are only 2 steps, characters, to get from pronouncing her name beginning with H and ending in O. Don John's name takes 5 steps. A line is the shortest path between 2 points. A step is a space, distance, a path from beginning to end. There are 6 paths in the play from hero to Don John. 1. The first path of H to O, takes 43 steps, characters speaking, in Act 1. 1. 2. The second path of H to O takes 32 steps in Act 2.1. 3. The third path of H to O takes 1 step between characters in 2.1 to 2.2. 4. The fourth, 35 steps in 3.1 to 3.2. 5. The fifth, 3 steps in 4.1. 6. Finally, the sixth takes 1 step in 4.1. My survey of H to O yielded neither 2 steps in between, so the name hero was not spelled in this way, but I will try some new experiments. Out next. Angel Thrickbot with me. Shakespeare has his bed tricks, secret swaps of bed bodies in the dark. Chaucer too, as well as Charles Dickens, except the bed is a guillotine. For one man's final rest in his historical fiction, A Tale of Two Cities. In my opinion, I think that this book demands to be read like it used to in the past, so that we don't become lost. Places and people in this book are equally important, and so is the author's generous gift to add details to anything, but especially to the seriousness of the injustices of the events of a crazy society. And, like I said with Shakespeare before, we need those details so that we may know that we are reading a fictional work and not living its horrors. Malak Kabbalah with me. Rereading the Sorrows of Young Werther, by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Werther's aesthetic appreciation for the one he loves, Lottie, drains his energies totally. Everything in his heart is said, and nothing is left to be described or reinvented about his feelings of infatuation. Soon after falling in love with her when it does not work out, and so, instead of having any freedom to let go, he does a depressing violence to himself. Malak Kabbalah with me. The slow until swift-paced play Antony and Cleopatra is one which, to borrow from something Minos says to Enobaris in the play, cannot be a true play since, for me, it steals my heart. Malak Grouchy with me. There is much stalling of the action in Measure for Measure so that questions can be answered and the best judgments can take place. There is much coming and going into and out of scenes also. In Hamlet, another play, for fun I wish to find at what point in Hamlet is there a stalling as well as much a coming and going into and out of the scene. With Hamlet, the action overall is quicker than in Measure for Measure. But my first match was with Hamlet delaying his revenge against King Claudius praying, but since there is not as much coming and going in that scene in contrast to the scene with the ghost at the play's beginning, I choose that scene as the one which is the best match, a stall, because the ghost will speak only to Hamlet, and a coming and going because before Hamlet comes and gets to speak with it, the ghost of Hamlet's father departs into thin air just at the break of dawn. Malak Jennifer with me. The function of consideration, for Christopher Smart, is to make a list which catalogues his perceptions of what he finds which relate to his subject, which happens to be his cat Jeffrey. Considering his cat, that act of consideration describes in praising phrases what Smart finds interesting about his cat, which was his companion when he was in a mental asylum. Hospitalized for being clinically mad, he was known to fall to his knees in public places and strongly declare his love for God. After he was released from the hospital, it was an unlucky disappointment that he was taken in and died in debtor's prison. Malak Donna with me. Reading my Everyman's Talmud, I appreciate how everything in it is a commentary on the Torah and Tanakh, which shows how many acts of charity work within and from a framework of learning wisdom in general. I think that though it has wisdom, that it also suggests that all cultures have wisdoms to offer because it is our memorable words, being the same as our deeds, that work across the boundaries of every language, since such sayings in the literatures of the world, useful it first or not, potentially can be possessed by us in our memories and used to do real good when they help us live better lives. Malak Shay with me. In the four Gospels, the knowledge of the identity of who Jesus is always under question, as if everybody in the land needs to be aware of who he is, and in a very urgent way if words and arguments do not convince the people. The miracles of Jesus are sure to, as those arguments and miracles become the proof and testament to his identity and to the promises he makes for those who know him in the Greek New Testament. Malak honey with me. Considering that Israel was no more or less always problematic in its worship of God and the commandments, other than the fact that God gave to David the idea to have his son Solomon build the temple in Chronicles 2, why was the temple needed in the first place? The Ark of the Covenant seems always to have been safe, though God's chosen people and rulers have a history with transgressing, and the building of the temple did not change that much. Malak grouchy with me. I read Moby Dick as a tale where men actively seek different kinds of smaller knowledges which when taken make them feel victorious. They fighting Quakers aboard the Pequod who hunt the whale, Moby Dick, are related to other tales in literature and history by the Welcome All-Seeing author, Herman Melville. The quest of the persecutors to kill the white whale is risky, and Ahab, the captain of the ship, being a madman, is just like the rest of the murderous crew, obsessed with trying to get things accurate with the others, so much so that knowledge itself is built from the bottom up. The knowledge that the men seek is of the materialistic personal kind and the sort which is of the parts of the whole rather than the whole. And so they speak to each other to win victories for the questions which drive them eventually to their doom. Ishmael is saved at the end from the shipwreck, but it was by chance. Malak Thrickbut with me. Claudius prays in Hamlet even though he killed Hamlet's father. This brings up a question, why pray at all if you have enemies? If prayer is to get Claudius ahead while leaving others in the dust, then it looks like prayer in his heart was not inclusive, but a selfish act. Malak Shay with me. Hamlet willingly is the center of attention in the whole of his play. Except for the short scene where Ophelia, bullied by Hamlet's words and actions, his killing of her father, where she is in the spotlight for a little while during Hamlet's absence in England before her own suicide. Malak Diana with me. I want to know just how Hamlet knows that the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Even in Christian folklore with the devil changing into the snake, not something Jews believe, who considers a snake a pleasing shape? I know of no other shapes he makes nor instances where that power is mentioned. Malak Donna with me. My guess is that Hamlet does not know, but is practicing being an actor on the stage of his life for an audience of would-be and welcome spies. From John Keats's short poem This Living Hand, I combined some pairs of words in the poem to make a list to see if that new list would relate to the poem somehow. Living plus silence equals prayer. Hand plus icy equals greed. Warm plus days equals summertime. Tomb plus days equals funerals. Living plus wish equals wool. Heart plus calm equals sleep. Hold plus stream equals a mill, or oars. Grasp plus life equals to cradle a baby. Hear plus hand equals handshake. From my list, prayer, greed, summertime, funerals, wool, sleep, a mill, or oars, to cradle a baby, and handshake, I will make pairs 2 for a shorter list. Prayer plus handshake equals saying grace at supper. Greed plus to cradle a baby equals maybe feeding. Summertime plus oars equals green leaves in the wind, a stretch I know. Funerals plus a mill equals coffin. Will plus sleep equals death. This list, saying grace, baby feeding, green leaves, coffin, and death, is what I will think about if it means anything. If I find it does for the study of the Keats poem or aside from it, I will put a comment in the comment box. Malak Kabbalah with me. Perhaps the miracle of Shakespeare's elaborate writing, its copious language in the mouths of hundreds of major people in the plays, was an invention to assure people that the tragedies could not possibly be Real if the language was so imaginative, vivid, and eloquent. In actual, real-world tragedies, there is not this sort of verbal abundance. We, therefore, enjoy the fictional plays as fictions because they are beyond us in the language of thought and because they are balanced in sweet sounds where sometimes the sense of reality is bitter. They, overwhelming visionary language clues us to them as fictions. Malak Kabbalah with me. I suppose it is a close reading of the character of King Duncan in Macbeth to see exactly what he does by looking at the verbs that are used to define his self. Lady Macbeth says the king comes here tonight, to their castle. We know he is one who comes. After the king arrives, the king says about himself that he is a teacher of what could be a gratitude. Herein I teach you how you shall bid God ild, reward us for your pains, and thank us for your trouble. We know nothing else directly about King Duncan. I believe that when he says this castle hath a pleasant seat, the air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses, the king is not talking about himself. My point is that when we study a character, only what they or others say about themselves, by looking strictly at the defining verbs, can we find out directly what they are like. Any other method of understanding them is more interpretive. Malak grouchy with me. I always think of angels weeping their hearts out when I reread King Lear. And then I think of how privileged I am that I will be an angel one day too, though there are still awfully horrible things which happen in that play. The angels I know feel many kinds of emotions, and I get to understand them when a play like King Lear brings those feelings out. Becoming an angel myself will not ever change the fact that Shakespeare wrote this play where what happens is so unfair and cruel. I don't know much, but I do feel sure that the whole of life is good. Though King Lear is a play which puts the mystery of why things are the way they are in a sort of isolated turmoil. Malak Diana with me. That so many people do not read, or have never even heard of King Lear, is one reason the angels weep, since they feel saddened by the injustice in the play and they want more company who share their sense of universal injustice from reading this work. If there was truth, there would be no arguing. But since we argue all the time, we all of us act as sophists towards each other because we refuse the harmony of just letting things be what they are in order to change what things are to convince others of our own ways of seeing things. However, the incapacity to feign beliefs arises in a moment when the truth evidently pridefully proposes itself as the beautiful good. Malak Kabbalah with me. Why cannot Hamlet be happy? Out of every character of Shakespeare's and of others, he is the one I wish most of all to become happier. But his ruin is the truth of the play, and I can only wish. I cannot make him better by my interpretation. Malak Shay with me. Though Socrates was cheerful about his own innocence, he was like an unsuccessful Joseph figure who could not get out of a jam, though Joseph did. Malak Thrickbut with me. Reading Book 2 of Paradise Lost by Milton, I am wondering why Satan, in the first place, is considered the king of hell as the book starts off proudly with him on his throne. What can he do to the other fallen angels? Or is it just his power of speech which gives him merit, which is admired by the rest, and therefore he is king there? Malak Ora with me. Thomas S. Kuhn in his book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions makes a good point that though science has its paradigm shifts, of one crisis after another replacing the important previous ideas which scientists held, that students of physics must still read prior scientists like Newton, Faraday, Einstein, and Schrödinger, even if their theories are now obsolete, or else the budding new students will be lost. In Shakespeare, in Love's Labour's Lost, the little court of scholar friends do justice to remembering their own set of 9 worthies who were famous throughout history and myth by firmly putting on their own play within a play with the 9 worthies as characters. Malak Donna with me. The most embarrassing moment for a character in Shakespeare's works is when Prince Hal tries on his father's, the King Henry IV's crown as the king is on his deathbed while the king is asleep. The king awakes and feels a sense of humiliation, and the prince, being caught, is embarrassed awkwardly before the son explains himself and they reconcile. Malak Thrickbut with me. Yesterday, I read Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, a wonderful work of literature which I loved ever since I had read it in 2001. I also read St. Augustine's City of God, an even greater work of the world. Though I disagree with it, but as writing St. Augustine matches excellently his searching thoughts with his authoritative style while attempting to blend his readings of the Bible with an understanding of Roman history. Malak honey with me. Dante was fortunate to have been a reader, since his poem would not be what it was if he had not come across the ideas like of hell, Hades, and limbo from his literary education. I think he goes through hell, not because he took a wrong step on the way of life, but because he took a right step and actualized in a new world what all had been on his mind for so long after reading so much. Malak honey with me. I am tonight reading Dante's Inferno. In every canto I have found that Dante questions Virgil, his self-proclaimed master, about hell and those who people it. Virgil tells Dante he likes his questions, so my question is, why does Dante ask questions? Angel grouchy with me. I ask the same question about Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure. Why are there so many questions in this play of his, with the most questions out of all of them? Tour guide feel. I am meditating on the idea of what it means to have done so much but with little result. The Jarndyce vs. Jarndyce case in Bleak House by Charles Dickens. So much went into that case that by the time it was over, it exhausted all of the funds and bills needed for the process, and not much was learned. Angel aura with me. I think that if I were to look for the best example of an unintentional accident in Shakespeare which did real harm, then I would find the passage where, in The Winter's Tale, Leonta's young son Maximus accidentally fatally drinks a cup of poison which Leont left out. Angel Shay with me. I am not sure just what to call it, maybe stoic, but when the state convicts Socrates to die, Socrates accepts his punishment in an almost cheerful way. This attitude in Shakespeare, accepting the law of the land even though it is wrong, seems the attitude of Cordelia when her father, the king, unfairly banishes her. Angel Penelope with me. Dying Edmund, after betraying his brother Edgar and others, said that he may yet do some good, and tells his brother Edgar that Cordelia is about to be hanged as if to save her from death, but it was too late. Edgar could not arrive in time to save her. Angel Thrickbut with me. The fishman, monster Caliban from Shakespeare's Tempest, is always worried about being pinched all over by Prospero, and he feels like he has no hope because he is Prospero's slave. Angel Thrickbut with me. Romeo felt terrible when he was banished after killing Juliet's cousin, Tybalt. He poured his woe out to Friar Lawrence, even threatening to kill himself because he thought being in exile while his new bride, Juliet, was far away, was worse than death. He said that it was easy for the friar to attempt to cheer him up, being that the friar, though Romeo's sentence a fair one since he was not punished with death, however, Romeo complained that the friar's words were spoken without just knowing how Romeo actually felt. Romeo was a little revolutionary to want to choose death until his sense came back to him, and he was able to think about others. Angel honey with me. I have on my mind the sadness and gloom in Romeo and Juliet when Juliet was going to marry Paris, but her parents and others thought she died after finding her dead, so they thought, on her wedding day, and they were very shocked. Angel ora Tiferito with me. Rereading a rich and strange play like The Tempest, I am almost certain that out of all of Shakespeare's plays, that this one has the most commands, characters asking other characters to do things. From the first line, "Bosun, come here," to the last, "Please you, draw near," to the last line of the epilogue, "Let your indulgence set me free." Commands are everywhere in this play. Angel Peruk with me. When the characters are not talking about what they experience, they are giving moralistic commands because they are shocked so much in Goethe's Faust. Faust, how strangely there glimmers through the dells a murky gleam like the dawn's first red, which even casts its flashing light into the deepest gorge of the abyss. Mephistopheles, Lord Mammon has, you must admit, illuminated his palace lavishly for the occasion. You're lucky to have seen this spectacle. I sent the arrival of boisterous guests from the Walpurgis Night section of Part 1, when they go down to see the mothers, translated by Stuart Atkins. Angel Jennifer with me. I am about to begin another reading of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, a tragedy, and I have some beginning ideas already. I believe that if Goethe desired to stick with creating just a beautiful work of art, he would have made it so, but the idea of working out the details in which an old scholar making a deal with the devil in order to be youthful once more makes for an outrageousness that goes beyond beauty. It also is educative. Angel Honey with me. I admit I am in love with the characters of Jane Austen's novel, Emma. As I was reading, I was going to begin developing some ideas about judgment, comedy, time and appearance, about which I began hoping to talk, but my unexplored love for the characters won me over, and I happily lost my train of thought. Angel Honey with me. Dealing with Alexander Pope's translation of Homer's Iliad, something wonderful always takes place. I always hear a cognitive music in this epic which is subtle, and it is very difficult to explain just how the effect of the cadence of the poems may be studied in a way such that I can connect the lines with other lines of the poem which I have memorized by similar cadences only. Yet, I think a study of parallel cadences is one more thing I want to do while reading the text. The hard part is that if you are a reader like me, who loves the music of the lines of this translation of Homer, it can be daunting at times to stop reading them in order to compare the line's cadence I just read with another one's cadence which I can recall from my memory. But doing so would be a big help. However, the musical comparisons of lines, for me, is something that is very hard to do. And I consider my musical side my best side. Angel Donna with me. Sometimes I wonder what parts of American history would have interested Shakespeare and inspired him to write some historical plays based in the United States. What would he have made slaves say? Indians, the revolutionaries, Lincoln, and other people? What kinds of songs would he have included in those American plays? Angel Thrickbot with me. Recently, after considering more the idea by the poet, Paul Valery, that reading is a military operation, I have been questioning exactly how peacefully I myself read when I unshelve one book or another. I mean, what am I looking for when I read, and if I am needing something in that quest, am I reading in a way where I am at war with my own impatience? I read a good part of the Kabbalistic Zohar the other day, and found that the way I was reading it was not peaceful. I have always thought of myself as a peaceful reader, calm even though I read fast at times, but at peace with the arguments of a book. Now I am not so sure after becoming aware and looking at myself while reading. I wonder if it is a good thing or bad, to read against the words of the author, and fight them, or one's own impatience. Can there be any remedy? Can a reader's peace ever be learned or relearned? Angel Lisbeth with me. Charles Baudelaire wrote once that if you want to know what time it is, look into the eyes of a cat. I have tried this before with cats, but all that passes between us is a special love. Angel Tickbot, with me. Some thoughts revisited on Paradise Lost, John Milton. The light is where the monarchy is, and where God is, there is an oracle. He, God, has ways. The way of God to men is not the solitary way of Paradise Lost's ending. The lost happiness is the happiness of heaven and not Eden. On page 4. To break the horrid silence, Satan talks to Beelzebub is to change, and he says how changed from him, Beelzebub. As silence to speech, brightness is to ruin. Why did he, Satan, speak? Honey with me. Many individuals feel that God has abandoned them, if they think that the biblical God was ever there with them in the first place, and these individuals, some of them, blame God because they have read how, as in Lamentations and other works in the Bible, how God's threats to abandon the Israelites became actualized, and they relate the matter of such a holy abandonment to their own lives. That might not, I think, be the best interpretation. If God has said in the Bible, "What I give, I can take away," and it seems that God does, as in the case of His presence and other blessings in life, we must be aware as well that God may be able to, but so can others, block one from a holy presence, and therefore we must be skeptical of who to blame, unless we are sure. It is a misunderstanding, I think, to think that the most dreadful case is always the answer to why we have our troubles, and we would do good, I think, if the blame was not put on ourselves if we really have been abused, to find other alternatives to who or what is causing one to become victimized other than just to blame God, for which we may not be so certain of God's fault. I say this not having any whole answers, but only bits which I, like others, am working out in my own life for when I have difficult times. Lest the case of Noah's be our own, where all we recognize is our family, we engage with others who are not angel aura with me. This is a follow-up on how I am beginning to understand Shakespeare's style, epistolary, letter-like in its communication. So here is a random experiment from Hamlet. Dear Gertrude, sweet Gertrude, leave us too. For we have closely sent for Hamlet hither, that he, as 'twere by accident, may hear affront Ophelia, her father, and myself, lawful espials. Will so bestow ourselves that, seeing, unseen, we may of their encounter frankly judge, and gather by him, as he is behaved, if 't be the affliction of his love or no, that thus he suffers for yours, Claudius. Dear Claudius and Ophelia, I shall obey you. And for your part, Ophelia, I do wish that your good beauties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness, so shall I hope your virtues will bring him to his wonted way again. To both your honors, your queen, Gertrude. These are in the chronological sequence of Hamlet, but without the salutations and endings, but I am beginning to read Shakespeare as if he is putting his play together as if it was composed of individual letters, drawn to forward the immediacy of the plot. I think it is useful. Angel honey with me. I need to check some more into it, but I began to notice, while reading Timon of Athens tonight, that Shakespeare looks like he is using an epistolary style, as if each passage is addressed to another character as a letter, and so it would clear a little more up for me about his style of writing if I read a few more plays for proof. I always have liked the Nietzschean wisdom about truth, there are no facts, only interpretations, about which I think he is dead on. As a sort of neo-sophist, I still hold skepticism high about everything except my own angels, whom I love and trust. I do not like Nietzsche's anti-democratic ideas, but being against the idea that individuals can possess a God's view of things, knowing all and being always right, Nietzsche and I and others who share this idea I think have a better advantage when it comes to understanding that we are in a trap of our own perspectives out of which we cannot get because we exist in place and historical time. Having said this, I think about truth in current matters just as a consensus which the members of one group or another use to assert the rules of their particular community, whatever community in which they participate. As a poet and not a philosopher, I end up thinking of some rules of communities as incompatible with other rules of other communities, but there is no way to tell which communities are the best, but that we typically choose our favorite communities and try to act coherently to the rules in those communities. I have hope that a pluralistic world will tolerate many diverse communities without stepping in and intruding on the rules by which they play, as long as those members do not hurt either themselves or others. Angel honey with me. Virgil's blessing on Dante after Dante is successful getting out of Purgatorio is, take henceforth thy pleasure as guide because free Upright and whole is thy will, and it were a fault not to act on its bidding. I read this and my eyes became happy, because I always knew Virgil to say pleasing things to Dante, especially contrary to the harsh and freakish surroundings of hell and purgatorio, and this confirms for me that idea floating out there that Virgil was an Epicurean poet. Though Dante is not, strictly speaking, but even Dante knew this and so wrote him as one. Angel honey with me. I am rereading Dante's Purgatorio, and am in Canto 13, which is the one which gives examples of kindness before Dante is purged of envy. There is a quote by one of the angel spirits who says, Amati da cui male avest. Love them from whom you have suffered wrong. Since characters in fiction and even our dreams are at times more alive to us than living people, can the suggestion of the angel also include figures from books, or our nightmares? In what sense can the villains of literature or of our bad dreams do us harm? For me, Iago is one example, of whom I say to myself, sure he brings fear in me, but can I love him? Maybe this kind of love is selective, to love parts, the good qualities in someone, which he has if you look at how he uses language and practices his words as actions. If only the actions were not so cruel. Angel honey with me. Critic Harold Bloom has said that he has never known anybody who loved their enemies. However, I think that the adage still holds as good wisdom, since Prometheus was released from being tortured by the cruel god Jupiter by learning to love his tormentor. See Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem, Prometheus Unbound. Yet, anyone who has read Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus knows how terrible the characters Demetrius and Chiron behave, and I would have the most difficult time as Lavinia did loving my rapists. It may be one of those things that are too big to define, like freedom, or like truth, but in Shelley's case, even like the mariner from Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, an act of a blessing takes place. Prometheus blesses the Furies, while the mariner, the sea snakes. Both acts of love in this sort must have been done with a grace that is otherworldly, especially if performed unaware. Finesse.